I was sitting on my back patio in Coral Springs, Florida, sipping my morning coffee when I heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking across my driveway like an executioner approaching the gallows. My stomach dropped because I knew exactly who it was before I even saw her perfectly styled blonde bob appear around the corner of my house. Brenda Whitmore, president of the Sunset Palms Homeowners Association, stood in my backyard with her tablet clutched to her chest like a shield and her lips pursed so tight they had completely disappeared into her face. Behind her, two other HOA board members followed like loyal servants, nodding along to whatever righteous fury she was about to unleash. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice dripping with barely contained rage, "we need to discuss your flagrant violation of community standards." I set down my coffee mug slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Good morning to you too, Brenda. What seems to be the problem?" She gestured wildly toward my pool area, where 6 magnificent Chilean flamingos were wading peacefully in the shallow end, their pink feathers gleaming in the morning sun. Those are the problem. Section 4.7 of the HOA covenant clearly states that no lawn decorations exceeding 3 feet in height are permitted without prior board approval. I stood up and walked closer to the pool, admiring the birds as they preened and strutted around. "These aren't decorations, Brenda. They're live animals." Her face turned an impressive shade of red that nearly matched the flamingos. "I don't care if they're the Queen of England's personal pets, Tyler. They look like tacky lawn ornaments and they need to go." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and opening up the folder where I kept all my documentation, "according to Florida state law, these are considered livestock under my agricultural exemption. I've got all the permits right here." The two board members behind Brenda exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a man named Harold with a comb over that defied physics, cleared his throat. "Brenda, maybe we should check with the county first." She whirled on him with such ferocity that he actually took a step backward. "The county doesn't supersede HOA regulations, Harold. That's why we exist." I had known this day was coming. Ever since I had leased the flamingos from an exotic bird sanctuary 3 months ago, I had been preparing for this exact confrontation. What Brenda didn't know was that I had done my homework thoroughly, very thoroughly. "Brenda, I respect your position, but you're wrong about this. The Florida Right to Farm Act specifically protects agricultural operations from local regulations that would restrict normal farming activities. These flamingos are part of a conservation breeding program that I'm participating in through the Caribbean Wildlife Foundation." She narrowed her eyes at me. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a farm. My property is 2 acres, which qualifies for agricultural classification. I pay agricultural taxes on it. I have the documentation to prove it." This was actually true. When I had purchased my house 5 years ago, I had specifically chosen this particular lot because of its size and the loophole it created. I worked from home as a software developer, and I had always wanted to do something meaningful with my land beyond just mowing grass every weekend. The Flamingo lease program had seemed perfect when I discovered it during a late-night internet rabbit hole. Brenda's tablet made an angry tapping sound as she typed furiously. "We'll see about that. Consider this your official notice that you're in violation of community standards. You have 14 days to remove these birds or face a fine of $100 per day." "You can't fine me for something that's legally protected," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was racing. "Watch me," she snapped, then turned on her heel and marched back around my house, her entourage scrambling to keep up. As soon as they were gone, I let out a long breath and sat back down. One of the flamingos, A particularly friendly one I had named Gerald wandered over to the edge of the pool and cocked his head at me curiously. The birds had been such a joy over the past few months. They were surprisingly low maintenance, mostly eating the special pellets I ordered online and occasionally snacking on algae from the pool. The sanctuary had assured me they were happy in Florida's climate, which was similar to their native habitat. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who I had retained specifically for HOA issues after Brenda had tried to fine me 2 years ago for painting my front door navy blue instead of the approved colonial blue. Yes, there was a difference according to her paint swatch book. No normal humans could not tell them apart. Tyler, Marcus answered on the second ring. Let me guess, Brenda found out about the Flamingos. How did you know? Because you told me 3 months ago that you were getting them, and I told you to wait until I had all the paperwork in order. Did you wait? I winced. In my defense, the sanctuary had an urgent need for placement, and I had already done most of the research myself. Marcus sighed heavily. What did she threaten you with? $100 a day fine starting in 14 days if I don't remove them. Okay, that's actually not as bad as I thought. She's giving you time, which means she's not entirely sure of her legal standing. That's good. Send me the letter when you get it in writing, and I'll draft a response. In the meantime, make sure all your permits are current and document everything. Take photos, keep receipts, log any interactions with the HOA. Already on it, I said, glancing at the detailed spreadsheet I had created specifically for this purpose. Good, and Tyler, don't engage with her directly anymore. Let everything go through me. We hung up, and I spent the next hour documenting the interaction, photographing the flamingos, and checking all my permits for the 3rd time that week. Everything was in order. My agricultural exemption was valid, my wildlife permit was current, and the lease agreement with the Caribbean Wildlife Foundation was ironclad. The foundation was a legitimate conservation organization that placed flamingos with qualified individuals who had appropriate facilities. The birds in my pool were part of their breeding program for Chilean flamingos, which were classified as near threatened in the wild. By housing them, I was contributing to conservation efforts while the foundation's main facility underwent renovations. It was a win-win situation, except apparently for Brenda and her vision of suburban conformity. 3 days later, I received the official violation notice in my mailbox. It was even more officious than Brenda's verbal warning, complete with cited code sections and a detailed description of my alleged violation. According to the letter, my decorative flamingo lawn ornaments exceeded the height restriction, created visual clutter, and diminished the aesthetic value of the neighborhood. I forwarded it to Marcus immediately, then posted a picture of Gerald on my Instagram with the caption, "Apparently, I have illegal decorations." The post blew up with comments from friends and former colleagues, most of them laughing at the absurdity of the situation. Several people tagged local news outlets, suggesting they cover the story. That night, I got a call from a reporter named Jessica Ramirez from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. "Mr. Jenkins, I saw your post about the HOA and the flamingos. Is this for real?" "Unfortunately, yes," I said, and proceeded to explain the entire situation. She was silent for a moment, then I heard her laughing. "This is perfect. Can I come by tomorrow and get some photos? Maybe interview you?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep this quiet and handle it through proper legal channels, but another part of me was tired of HOAs running roughshod over property rights and common sense. "Let me talk to my lawyer first." Marcus gave it the green light. "Actually, public opinion might work in your favor here. Just stick to the facts and don't make it personal." The next morning, Jessica showed up with a photographer. The flamingos cooperated beautifully, posing like natural models while the photographer snapped away. Gerald even did a little mating dance, which made everyone laugh. "So these are real, live flamingos," Jessica said, stating the obvious but clearly delighted by it. "Yep. I leased them from the Caribbean Wildlife Foundation as part of their conservation program. They're wonderful birds, very peaceful, and completely legal under Florida's agricultural exemption laws. And the HOA thinks they're lawn ornaments. That's what the violation notice says." She shook her head, grinning. "This is going to make a great story. When does your fine start?" "In 11 days, if I don't remove them." The article ran 2 days later on the front page of the local section with the headline, "HOA declares war on wildlife conservation, mistakes real flamingos for lawn ornaments." It was perfect. Jessica had done her homework, including interviews with the Caribbean Wildlife Foundation director, who explained the conservation program in detail, and a property law expert from the University of Miami, who confirmed that my agricultural exemption should protect me from HOA restrictions. The story got picked up by the Associated Press that afternoon. By evening, it had gone viral. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, interview requests from national news outlets, and messages from friends I hadn't spoken to in years. The best message came from my sister, Rachel, who lived in Oregon. "Only you would end up in a national news story about HOA flamingos. Mom is thrilled, by the way. She's been sharing the article with everyone at her book club." I was both mortified and vindicated. The publicity was overwhelming, but it also meant that Brenda couldn't sweep this under the rug or bully me into compliance. That assumption was tested the next morning when I found a new letter in my mailbox, this time from the HOA's attorney. It was a cease and desist letter demanding that I remove the flamingos immediately and threatening legal action if I didn't comply. They also claimed I was creating a public nuisance and that the birds posed a health hazard. Marcus called me as soon as I forwarded him the letter. "They're desperate. This is good for us. They're making claims they can't substantiate." "What do?" we respond in kind. "I'll draft a letter explaining that you're in full compliance with all applicable laws and that any attempt to fine or sue you will be met with a countersuit for harassment. I'm also going to request a formal hearing before the HOA board so we can present your case publicly." "Do you think that will work?" "I think Brenda is used to people backing down. You're not backing down, and now you have public support. That changes the dynamic entirely." The formal hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later at the community clubhouse. In the meantime, the story continued to gain traction. I was interviewed by NPR, the BBC, and even a Japanese news program that was doing a segment on strange American suburban conflicts. The Caribbean Wildlife Foundation reported a surge in donations and applications for their Flamingo placement program. I tried to maintain my normal routine, working during the day and spending my evenings taking care of the flamingos. They seemed blissfully unaware of the controversy they had created, content to wade around the pool and occasionally fly short distances across my yard. Flamingos couldn't sustain long flights, but they could manage impressive bursts when startled. One afternoon, I was working on a coding project when I heard voices coming from my front yard. I walked to the window and saw Brenda standing on the sidewalk with 2 other women, all of them pointing at my house and talking animatedly. One of them was taking photos. I grabbed my phone and started recording, just in case. Marcus had been very clear about documenting everything. After about 10 minutes, they moved on. I checked my Ring camera footage and saw that they had been measuring the distance from the street to my front door and examining my landscaping. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. That night, I got another letter. This one informed me that my front yard landscaping was out of compliance because my grass was a quarter-inch too long. The fine was $50, due immediately. I measured my grass myself. It was exactly 2.5 inches, which was within the allowed range of 2 to 3 inches according to the HOA covenants. I took photos with a ruler for scale and sent them to Marcus along with the letter. "They're harassing you," he said when he called. "This is retaliatory and probably illegal. Document everything, but don't pay the fine. We'll deal with it at the hearing." The day of the hearing arrived with all the tension of a high-noon showdown. The community clubhouse was packed. Apparently, word had spread, and neighbors who had never shown up to an HOA meeting in their lives were suddenly very interested in the Flamingo situation. I recognized several faces from the news coverage, including Jessica Ramirez. I arrived with Marcus, both of us carrying briefcases full of documentation. Brenda was already seated at the board table with the other 4 board members, looking like she was ready for battle. Her lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit, sat beside her. The meeting was called to order, and Brenda wasted no time. "We're here to address the ongoing violation by Mr. Tyler Jenkins regarding unauthorized decorative elements on his property. Mr. Jenkins has refused to comply with our directives to remove 6 large flamingo decorations from his pool area." Marcus stood up. "Point of clarification. They're not decorations. They're live animals under a conservation lease agreement." Brenda's lawyer stood as well. "Semantics. The HOA covenants are clear about maintaining community standards. These flamingos, whether real or artificial, create visual disruption and violate the spirit of the community guidelines." "The spirit," Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge. "That's a vague legal standard. The Florida Right to Farm Act specifically protects agricultural activities from restrictive covenants." "This is not a farm," Brenda interjected. Marcus pulled out a document. "Mr. Jenkins' property is classified as agricultural land by Broward County. He pays agricultural taxes. He has all required permits for housing livestock. Here's the documentation." He handed copies to the board members. Brenda's face was getting redder by the second. Her lawyer tried a different approach. "The birds pose a health hazard. They could carry diseases that affect the community." I stood up for the first time. "I have veterinary records showing all 6 flamingos are healthy and regularly checked by a licensed avian veterinarian. They're probably cleaner than most of the dogs in this neighborhood." A few people in the audience laughed, which made Brenda's expression even darker. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "the harassment of my client has escalated to include frivolous violations for things like grass length that clearly fall within covenant specifications. This suggests a pattern of retaliation, which could be grounds for legal action against the HOA." Harold, the comb-over board member, leaned toward Brenda and whispered something. She shook her head firmly. Another board member, a woman named Patricia, raised her hand. "Can I ask a question? If these birds are part of a conservation program, doesn't that benefit the community?" "That's irrelevant," Brenda snapped. "Actually, I think it's very relevant," Patricia said. "We've been getting calls and emails all week from residents. Most of them support Tyler. They think the flamingos are wonderful." "We don't govern by popular opinion," Brenda said. "No, but we do represent the community," Patricia replied. "And if the community supports this, maybe we need to reconsider." The lawyer whispered something to Brenda. She listened, then turned back to the room. "We're prepared to offer a compromise. Mr. Jenkins can keep the flamingos if he erects a privacy fence that completely blocks them from view. I looked at Marcus. He shook his head slightly. That would cost approximately $15,000, I said. Why should I pay that for birds that are completely legal? Because you want to be part of this community, Brenda said, her voice syrupy and threatening at the same time. I am part of this community. I pay my dues. I follow the rules. What I won't do is spend $15,000 because you personally don't like my birds. The room erupted in applause. Brenda looked shocked, like she couldn't believe people were actually opposing her. Marcus held up his hand for quiet. Let me be clear about the legal situation here. If the HOA pursues fines against Mr. Jenkins, we will file suit claiming the fines violate state agricultural protection laws. We will also pursue damages for harassment and abuse of power. Given the public attention this case has received, I imagine many firms would be happy to take this pro bono just for the precedent it would set. The other board members were looking increasingly uncomfortable. Harold whispered to Brenda again, more urgently this time. We need to caucus, Brenda finally said through gritted teeth. The board members left the room, and the audience immediately started buzzing with conversation. Several neighbors came up to me to express their support. An elderly woman named Margaret, who lived 3 houses down, told me she loved seeing the flamingos during her morning walks. They make the neighborhood special, she said. Brenda needs to lighten up. After 20 minutes, the board returned. Brenda looked like she had been sucking on lemons. After discussion, she said stiffly, the board has decided to table this matter pending further legal review. It was a victory, but not the complete vindication I had hoped for. The threat still hung over my head. Marcus leaned over to me. That's actually good. It means they're backing down but don't want to lose face. Give it a few weeks and this will die down. He was half right. Over the next few days, the media attention faded as the news cycle moved on to other stories. But the tension in Sunset Palms didn't decrease. If anything, it got worse. I started noticing that my garbage cans would be knocked over on collection days. Small branches appeared on my driveway. My mailbox was vandalized twice, covered in spray paint that I had to clean off. Each time, I filed a police report and saved the documentation. The worst incident came 3 weeks after the hearing. I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of the flamingos making distressed calls. I ran outside in my pajamas to find someone had thrown chunks of bread covered in what looked like rat poison into my pool area. I immediately called 911, then the emergency number for the Caribbean Wildlife Foundation. By the time the police arrived, I had managed to keep the flamingos away from the poisoned bread and collect it as evidence. The responding officer, a young guy named Officer Martinez, took photos and wrote up a detailed report. "This is serious," he said. "This is animal cruelty, possibly attempted poisoning. Do you have any security cameras? Just the one on my front door. You might want to get more." This kind of escalation usually doesn't stop on its own. The foundation sent someone out first thing in the morning to check on the birds. Thankfully, none of them had eaten the poisoned bread. But the incident shook me badly. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. Someone had tried to kill the flamingos. I called Marcus immediately. "We need to do something. This has gone too far." "I agree. I'm going to file for a restraining order against Brenda and request a full investigation into the HOA's conduct." "You really think Brenda did this?" "I don't know, but the harassment started after she targeted you. Even if she didn't do it herself, she created an environment where someone felt justified doing it." Over the next week, I installed a comprehensive security camera system covering my entire property. I also hired a private investigator that Marcus recommended, a former cop named David Shepard who specialized in HOA disputes. "You'd be surprised how often these things turn nasty," David told me during our first meeting. "HOAs have a lot of power, and some people let it go to their heads." He started by interviewing neighbors and reviewing the timeline of harassment. What he found was disturbing. Apparently, Brenda had been going around the neighborhood telling people that my flamingos were bringing down property values and that I was running an illegal business from my home. Neither claim was true, but she had been spreading the rumors systematically. More concerning, David discovered that the HOA had taken out a loan 6 months earlier to cover operating expenses. They were in financial trouble, and the board had been looking for ways to increase revenue. Fines were one of their primary income sources. "They're targeting people with ridiculous violations to generate money," David explained. "You're not the only one. I found 3 other homeowners who have been hit with questionable fines in the past 6 months. This changed everything. It wasn't just about my flamingos anymore. The HOA was running what amounted to a shakedown operation. Marcus filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the affected homeowners, alleging abuse of power, harassment, and violation of Florida HOA regulations. The lawsuit named Brenda personally, along with the other board members who had voted to approve the excessive fining scheme. The day the lawsuit was filed, local news picked up the story again. "HOA president accused of running fine scheme," ran the headline. Jessica Ramirez did a follow-up piece that included interviews with the other targeted homeowners. One woman had been fined $500 for having the wrong shade of white paint on her trim. Another had been fined for having a basketball hoop that was 2 inches too far into his driveway. The pattern was clear and damning. 2 days after the lawsuit was filed, I got a call from Harold, the comb-over board member. "Tyler, can we meet? Just the 2 of us." I was suspicious but agreed, making sure to bring my phone to record the conversation with his permission. We met at a coffee shop in Coral Springs. Harold looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "I need to tell you something," he said after we sat down. "I voted against Brenda on the fine scheme, so did Patricia. But Brenda has dirt on the other 2 board members, things that would ruin their reputations if it came out. She's been using it to control them." "What kind of dirt?" He shook his head. "I can't say, but it's bad enough that they do whatever she wants. The whole fine scheme was her idea. She convinced them it was necessary to save the HOA from bankruptcy." "Is the HOA really going bankrupt?" "We're in financial trouble, yeah, but not because of anything legitimate. Brenda's been using HOA funds for personal expenses. Nothing huge, just little things here and there. Dinners, spa days, claiming they were board business. It adds up." I felt my stomach drop. "That's embezzlement." "I know. That's why I'm talking to you. I can't be part of this anymore. I'm resigning from the board and I'm willing to testify about what I know." I immediately called Marcus on speaker. Harold repeated everything he had told me, and Marcus asked him to come to his office that afternoon to give a formal statement. With Harold's testimony, the case against Brenda and the HOA board exploded. Marcus turned over the evidence to the state attorney's office, and within a week, investigators showed up at the HOA offices with a warrant to seize financial records. The investigation took 2 months. During that time, life in Sunset Palms was surreal. Brenda stopped showing up at board meetings. The remaining board members tried to conduct business as usual, but everyone knew something big was coming. I continued caring for the Flamingos, who remained blissfully unaware of the chaos they had inadvertently caused. Gerald had bonded with one of the females, and according to the foundation representative who checked on them regularly, they might breed next season. The idea of baby flamingos in my pool was both exciting and terrifying. The police investigation into the poisoning incident eventually led to a teenage kid named Brandon who lived 4 streets over. His parents were friends with Brenda, and apparently he had overheard them complaining about my flamingos at a barbecue. He thought he was doing them a favor by trying to get rid of the birds. When confronted with the evidence from my new security cameras, which had captured him sneaking into my yard, he confessed. He was charged with animal cruelty and trespassing. Because he was 17, he was tried as a juvenile, but he still faced serious consequences. His parents were horrified and apologized to me profusely. They had no idea he was planning to do anything like that. The criminal case against Brenda came to a head in September. The state attorney's office charged her with embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power. The financial investigation had uncovered over $40,000 in misappropriated HOA funds over 3 years, along with evidence that she had been blackmailing the other board members to maintain control. The trial was scheduled for November, but Brenda's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and 5 years probation. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Florida. The day her plea deal was announced, I was sitting on my patio with Gerald and the other flamingos, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. The whole ordeal had taken 7 months from start to finish. 7 months of stress, legal fees, and constant vigilance. But it was over. I had won, not just for myself but for everyone else in Sunset Palms who had been victimized by Brenda's scheme. The class action lawsuit was settled out of court. The HOA's insurance company paid damages to all affected homeowners and funded a complete restructuring of the board. New elections were held, and Patricia was voted in as the new president. One of her first acts was to officially recognize my agricultural exemption and apologize on behalf of the HOA for the harassment I had endured. Life slowly returned to normal. The media attention faded completely this time, though I still occasionally got messages from people who had seen the original Flamingo story. The Caribbean Wildlife Foundation asked if I wanted to continue housing the birds after the breeding program concluded, and I agreed. They had become part of my daily routine, and I couldn't imagine my backyard without them. Marcus sent me a final bill in December, though he had significantly reduced his fees given the outcome. "Consider it my contribution to HOA reform," he said with a laugh. My sister visited for Thanksgiving and spent hours photographing the flamingos. "You know," she said over dinner, "when you called me about leasing flamingos last year, I thought you had finally lost it. But this worked out pretty well. Pretty well. I was sued, harassed, and someone tried to poison my birds. Yeah, but you also took down a corrupt HOA president and became a minor celebrity. Plus, you have flamingos in your pool. That's objectively cool." I couldn't argue with that logic. On New Year's Eve, I threw a party. I invited my neighbors, including Margaret and several others who had supported me during the conflict. Patricia came too, along with Harold and his wife. Even Jessica Ramirez showed up, curious to see how things had turned out. We stood around my pool as midnight approached, watching the flamingos sleep with their heads tucked under their wings. Someone had brought champagne, and we counted down the seconds to the new year. As fireworks erupted in the distance, Gerald woke up and let out a loud, honking call. The other flamingos joined in, creating a chorus that was both ridiculous and beautiful. "To the flamingos," Patricia said, raising her glass. "The most controversial lawn decorations in Florida history." Everyone laughed and drank. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors. people who had become genuine friends through this bizarre ordeal, and felt genuinely grateful. The next morning, I woke up early and went outside to feed the birds. The sun was just rising over the palm trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that almost matched Gerald's feathers. He waddled over to greet me, his long neck curved in what I had learned to recognize as a friendly posture. "Happy New Year, buddy," I said, tossing him some pellets. He caught them expertly and made a soft chirping sound that I chose to interpret as gratitude. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw the news. Brenda reported to probation this morning, paid her first restitution check. Justice served." I smiled and typed back a thumbs-up emoji. Another message came through, this time from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Catherine Gordon from the Exotic Bird Conservation Society. We saw your story last year and were wondering if you'd be interested in speaking at our annual conference about your experience with the Flamingo program. We think it would be inspiring for others considering participation." I read the message twice, then looked at Gerald and his companions. They had caused me 7 months of absolute chaos, cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, and turned my quiet suburban life into a media circus. I typed back, "I'd be honored to speak. When is the conference?" Because despite everything, it had been worth it. The Flamingos had exposed corruption, brought a community together, and reminded me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never expected to fight. Over the next few months, I did speak at that conference. I also started a blog about my experiences, which attracted attention from other HOA reform advocates across the country. Apparently, stories like mine were more common than I had realized. HOAs wielding excessive power, targeting homeowners with frivolous fines, and generally making life miserable for anyone who didn't conform to their vision of suburban perfection. My blog led to interview requests from podcasts and news outlets doing investigative pieces on HOA abuse. I became an accidental activist, though I never set out to be one. I just wanted to keep my flamingos. The Caribbean Wildlife Foundation expanded their placement program, partly because of the publicity from my case. They reported a 300% increase in qualified applications from people wanting to participate in conservation efforts. Several other exotic bird programs started similar initiatives, placing everything from parrots to peacocks with appropriate homeowners. Brenda, meanwhile, disappeared from public life entirely. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to a different county, presumably to start over somewhere people didn't know her history. I felt a small twinge of sympathy for her, but only small. She had brought her downfall on herself through greed and a need for control. The 2 board members she had been blackmailing also resigned, though the details of what she had on them never became public. Harold told me it was better that way, that some secrets deserved to stay buried as long as the people involved learned their lesson. Patricia proved to be an excellent HOA president. She instituted transparent financial reporting, limited fines to genuinely necessary situations, and actually listened to homeowners' concerns. Sunset Palms transformed from a neighborhood governed by fear and pettiness into a genuine community. Property values, ironically, went up. Turns out people liked living in a neighborhood famous for having conservation flamingos and a reasonable HOA. Several real estate agents even started using my house in their marketing materials, with my permission of course. Gerald and his mate, who I had named Georgina, successfully bred in March. They had 1 chick, a gangly gray creature that would eventually turn pink as it matured. The foundation was thrilled and asked if I would be willing to keep the chick until it was old enough to be placed elsewhere or returned to their main facility. I agreed without hesitation. Watching Gerald and Georgina care for their baby was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. They were devoted parents, taking turns feeding and protecting the chick. I spent hours just sitting by the pool, watching their family dynamics. My own family came to visit more often. My mother, who had been worried when I first told her about the HOA conflict, relaxed once everything was resolved. She fell in love with the Flamingos and started sending me care packages of enrichment toys and treats for them. "I'm proud of you," she told me during one visit. "You stood up for what was right, even when it was hard." "I just wanted to keep my birds, Mom. It was more than that. You exposed corruption and protected your community. That matters." By summer, the flamingo chick had grown significantly and developed the beginnings of pink coloration. The foundation decided to let me keep all the birds permanently, upgrading my status from foster to full program partner. They helped me make some improvements to my pool area to better accommodate breeding flamingos long term. I also started volunteering with the foundation, helping them screen potential participants for their placement program and educating the public about flamingo conservation. It gave me a sense of purpose beyond my regular job, a feeling that I was contributing to something important. One afternoon in July, I was giving a virtual tour of my flamingo setup to a family in Tampa considering participation in the program when my doorbell rang. I excused myself and went to answer it, expecting a delivery. Instead, I found Officer Martinez, the cop who had taken the report when someone poisoned the bread. He was in civilian clothes and holding a covered dish. "Hey, Tyler. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. My wife made extra empanadas, and I remembered you mentioning you liked Cuban food." I was touched by the gesture. "Come in, please. The flamingos are out back if you want to see them again." We sat on the patio eating empanadas and talking about everything that had happened since that night. Martinez told me he had followed the case closely and was glad to see justice served. "You know," he said, "that night when I responded to your call, I thought you were going to be some eccentric rich guy with more money than sense. But you really cared about those birds. You were shaking when you showed me the poisoned bread. I was terrified something would happen to them. That's what made the difference, I think. People could see you genuinely cared. It wasn't about being stubborn or making a point. You were protecting something you loved." His words stayed with me long after he left. He was right. This whole situation had never been about winning an argument with the HOA or getting attention. It had been about protecting creatures that depended on me, about standing up for what I believed was right even when it was difficult. The anniversary of my first confrontation with Brenda rolled around in September. A local reporter reached out asking if I wanted to do a "Where Are They Now?" follow-up piece. I agreed, and the resulting article focused on the positive changes in Sunset Palms and the expansion of conservation programs inspired by my case. The article included a photo of me standing by the pool with all 7 flamingos, including the now nearly full-grown chick. Gerald stood right next to me in the photo, his long neck curved and his bright pink feathers gleaming in the sunlight. He looked magnificent. That photo went viral again, but this time in a gentler way. People shared it with captions about perseverance and standing up for what you believe in. Several motivational Instagram accounts featured it. I even saw it made into a meme, though I never quite understood what "flamingo dad energy" meant. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm as fall arrived. I worked during the day, cared for the flamingos in the evening, and spent weekends volunteering with the foundation or working on my blog. I started dating someone I met at a conservation event, a veterinary technician named Sarah who thought the whole Flamingo story was hilarious and impressive in equal measure. Patricia stopped by one evening in October with some news. The HOA just got our audit back for the year. We're completely solvent now, and we actually have a surplus. We're thinking of using it to build a community garden. Wanted to get your thoughts since you're our resident agricultural expert. I laughed at the title. I think that's a great idea. Are you going to let people grow vegetables? That's the plan. Nothing commercial, just giving people space to grow food if they want to. We figured if we can have conservation flamingos in the neighborhood, we can certainly have some tomatoes and herbs. The community garden opened the following spring. It became a gathering place for neighbors, somewhere people could work together and build relationships. Kids planted sunflowers and pumpkins. Elderly residents grew herbs and shared recipes. It was everything an HOA should encourage. People building community, not tearing it down. On the one-year anniversary of the lawsuit settlement, Marcus called me. Thought you'd want to know, Brenda finished paying her restitution. That chapter is officially closed. How much did she end up paying? $42,000 to the HOA, plus about $15,000 in damages to the individual homeowners in the class action, plus court costs and fees. It wasn't cheap for her. You think she learned anything from it? I don't know. I hope so. But that's not really our problem anymore. He was right. Brenda's redemption or lack thereof wasn't my concern. What mattered was that justice had been served and the system, imperfect as it was, had eventually worked. As I sat on my patio that evening, watching Gerald and his family wade through the pool in the fading light, I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been almost 2 years since I first brought the Flamingos home. 2 years of conflict, resolution, and unexpected transformation. My quiet suburban life had been upended completely. But in its place, I had found purpose, community, and a family of pink birds that greeted me every morning with enthusiastic honking. The Flamingos had changed everything, though not in any way I could have predicted. Gerald waded over to the edge of the pool and looked at me with his dark eyes. After 2 years, I like to think I could read his expressions. Right now, he looked content, maybe even happy. You caused quite a mess, you know that, I told him. He honked softly and preened a feather. But I wouldn't change it, not for anything. And I meant it. Every bit of chaos, every stressful moment, every legal battle had been worth it. Because in fighting for the Flamingos, I had discovered something important about myself. I was stronger than I thought, more principled than I realized, and willing to stand up against injustice, even when it would have been easier to back down. The HOA had tried to fine me for my flamingo decorations. They had been actual live flamingos on lease. And that simple misunderstanding had changed everything, for me and for Sunset Palms. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes standing up for a few pink birds means standing up for an entire community. As darkness fell and the Flamingos settled in for the night, I went inside feeling grateful for every moment of the ridiculous, wonderful, challenging journey. Tomorrow, I would wake up, feed the birds, and continue the work of caring for them and advocating for conservation. But tonight, I would rest, knowing that sometimes the best decoration a home can have is the courage to be different, the determination to do what is right, and maybe, just maybe, a few live flamingos in the pool.